So, welcome to today's talk. This segment is called Startup Slow Down with the wonderful Leanne Ware. Leanne has got 20 years experience in the industry under her belt and has built a enviable local and global network. Previously working for others, she has now gone solo with her company Distinctly Aware, and there are other projects too. So, without
Mhm.
further delay, I shall let you introduce yourself, Leanne.
Hi, yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. So, yeah, as you alluded to, in September 2020, I launched Distinctly Aware, which was very much an idea born out of everything that I've done for other people in terms of brand management, marketing, building on my experience of being in the trade and bringing it all together and being able to offer it to independent brands. And a lot of those brands are startup brands, and hopefully the value that I can bring to them is that I have worked with huge companies in terms of your Bacardis of this world, but also having worked with smaller distributors such as Mangrove and working on smaller brands as well, then it means that I've been able to see and have insight into a number of different ways to build a brand, however large the budget is, however small the budget is, what the experiences of the brand owner of creating an actual spirit brand or not, as the case may be. So it's been wonderful. And yeah, as I say, I think also invaluable has been my experience previously having worked in the on-trade and building up a network, building up insights. So what do bartenders actually think about a brand as opposed to just having a consumer head on? And that's been really great because I've also worked with brands such as Whitley Neal, which has become a huge juggernaut, but started off as very much as a bartender brand and it's become a huge consumer win. So yeah, and Distinctly Aware is very much divided into two parts. We work with brands who are established, which I use the term loosely, i.e. they have a product, they're bottled themselves, but they might not necessarily have a plan going forward, or they need a little bit of guidance for that. And then the other side of the business is MPD, and that could be extending a current line extension, or it could be taking a whole new idea that lives in someone's brain, but they have no idea on how to execute it. So it's really fun. And with Distinctly Aware, instead of me just being completely solo, I have what I call a core team. So depending on the brief, if somebody just needs somebody to do social, or you need to sort out a media plan, or you need brand strategy, or you need commercial strategy, then I have the team to bring in dependent on where you are in your journey. And then if things weren't going crazy enough and busy enough with that, in the background, I was working on another idea, which I launched a couple of weeks ago, called UFT. As in, that's good when you have a good drink. And that actually means that we have what I like to think is an end-to-end proposition for Distinctly Aware. So whereas we can start with an initial concept for a brand, UFT allows a brand to showcase themselves. And UFT is a website that is dedicated to enhancing the at-home drinking experience, as well as getting ready to go out again. It's the go-to guide for drinking in, out and up. So we've got on there, we pulled together everything from who's doing cocktail deliveries, who's doing premium pre-batch cocktails for you to order. We've got a Recipedia on there with cool videos, impactful pictures. We've got bartenders who have got consumer facing insight that we can show. We've got a YouTube channel. We've got a gift section on there as well. And yeah, loads. So yeah, and there's more to come. So there's lots going on. So hopefully lots of bits of insight that can help for startups slow down. As much as I'm saying startup slow down, I realise I've done a lot of things very quickly. So, so yes.
No slowing down here.
No, not at all. Not at all. Although I will say, UFT was a project that started in March 2020 when COVID hit. So there has been prep, which is
Yes.
a key tip.
Yes.
So yeah, so that's the intro. So I'm sorry. What's the what's
I
the
don't, no,
question?
it's absolutely fine. I think, to be honest, everything that you said there is a really good example of how all-encompassing,
Mm,
your knowledge and what you can offer people watching this video will be. It
mm,
doesn't matter where they are in their timeline as
exactly.
such. There's
Exactly.
something that you can help them with. So it is worth them paying attention.
Exactly.
Um, so I'll just lead into the first question. So starting from scratch,
Mm.
where do we start in creating a brand? What are the fundamental components? I mean, in my mind, I had logo, story, and product, but I don't know if there's more to it than that. Where do we start?
Yeah, so first thing, passion. So, why are you creating this? So it's all about, okay, so how should I phrase this? We have a number of different brand owners who come at different stages of the journey, even at the very start. So you've got some people who just have an idea because they can see a gap in the market. So it's very much a fundamental business idea. Like, I can see this gap here, we can make money here. What does that look like? But when I say passion is needed, you can still have passion in an idea in terms of driving it forward, because passion is going to help you on a number of different ways, which I'll get to later. But passion in terms of building a brand that you've got in your head, that you've been circling around, that's really big. So in terms of the fundamentals, like you mentioned, like get your logo, get your brand, I wouldn't even start with that, because that's where people like me or designers could come in, where we take those internal verbal conversations that you've been having with yourself in the shower, on the toilet, in bed, about what you want to do with your brand, and then we try and tease out what that's going to look like. I suppose the way I'm phrasing it, it's a bit like if you have to do one of those drawings with a criminologist who will paint
Yes.
what your vision
Yeah.
is. So that's what we can do. And then what we do is also, so even if you've just got, I want to create an X type of liqueur that's bubblegum flavored with essence of metal in it, whatever it is, it doesn't matter, however small it is, just have that idea and then come to the table with that idea, and with the expectation that a number of questions are going to be asked of you, which is going to include, okay, well, what's the vision for the brand? Do you see this fitting in, is it going to be purely a passion project? I use that word again. So it's just something that you've always wanted to do, it's something cool, and it's a side hustle and a side project. Is this something that you really see as being the next big thing that you want Diageo to acquire or get bought out in 5 years' time? And do you have money to run with this? Because it's not cheap. And I think a lot of people have a stumbling block whereby they go, right, well, A, how hard can it be to create a liquid? Well, you make it as hard or as big as as difficult as you want it to be. But there's the difference between trying to find a cheap, easy fix way that might not give you the standout, but gives you an idea and a bottle and something to run with. Or you can have a long-term approach. But either way, whether you've got your budget for production, whatever scale you want to go to, it's the and then what. And a lot of brands don't ever think about the and then what, which goes back to, what's the idea for the brand? Is this going to be the next big thing? Is it a passion project? Is it something that you want to sit in top end bars alone? Is it just a cocktail project? A product which only 10 mils of that product is going to be used? Is it something that you want to compete with house pour spirits, in which case get ready for having big wallets and competing with the payments that get played and the advertising and everything else? So have an idea of where you see this not just fitting in the market, but also what the vision is for you with this product as a business. And then also know who your competitors are. So people go, well, this is great, but actually they don't look into who their actual competitors are. And actually, if you're not too sure about that, then that's where someone like myself can come in and maybe give you products that you're not thinking about. Because sometimes you get a lot of products where they just go, well, they can, well, put it to you like this, you can compare a product based on the actual liquid itself and flavor profile. Are you comparing it on pricing? Are you comparing it on other areas in the category? Are you comparing it on what's happening in export? Are you comparing it on what's sitting on a shelf in Tesco's versus what's sat on a shelf in the Savoy? So there's lots of different things to look at in terms of competitor, and some of the things that you might not think are a competitor can be a competitor. So, and that's before you even thought about a bloody logo. That's the nice stuff.
So much to it.
So much more to it. Yeah. So yeah, and then we do other things like your tone of voice, what's the character, and I know it's probably something we'll talk about later, but with social media, getting those fundamentals in place, like what is your presence going to be like? So, is it the brand owner's tone of voice? If you've got someone like Whitley Neal, where it's Johnny Neal's so well known and you want him to come across in tone of voice, or is it a brand like Beaufort Spirit with Leo Crabtree, who's got this phenomenal way of speaking, extremely intellectual, very thoughtful, very intricate, has thought about every single element of that brand, and his opinions you want to come to life as well. But again, how do you also make that accessible for people to, you know, enjoy and read as well? And it's finding that right balance as well. And that comes in with tone of voice, the brand look and feel, the type of imagery that you use and everything else. So yeah,
Fantastic.
loads.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
No
That's
worries.
amazing. Okay, so if we're starting to look at setting things up, you're starting to think about who you're selling to. And I
Mhm.
think it's quite an important thing to cover because there's no point just trying to, it's good to target, basically. It's
Yeah,
good to
yeah,
have an
yeah.
idea and to target. Could I
Yeah.
please get some thoughts on how to find your target audience?
Right, so I had to have a little snigger because it always used to make me laugh. I would be sat in meetings and we'd have lots of agencies, and they'd all come back with having assessed the brand identity, what who we're targeting, and then they'd come back and go, well, it's Rachel 26, lives in Chiswick, likes you know, likes wearing pink floral, whatever it is. And it was specific without being specific. I get what was being done, but actually in this day and age, I don't think you need to drill down as much as that, because, you know, it's surprising who can actually like a product without them necessarily being in your target audience.
Yeah.
That being said, so don't alienate yourself, don't cut your nose off to spite your face. But that being said, there are just some fundamental things that we do look at. So, you know, age, for example. So, an age, just a little bit of a tip with this. So you'll get so many brands that go, well, it's 18 to 35. And you're like, right, wrong. Great, you're creating a £40 product. Is an 18-year-old or a 24-year-old going to be able to afford a £40 product as they move along? You know, conversely, so you look within the age demographic, what are they doing? What are their spending habits like? What kind of interests do they have? And the reason why it's probably more, I think, I feel more comfortable doing those things now is because of social media. Because the reality is as well, and you don't have to be a genius on social media to boost and do advertising and all of these things, but you have to look into, you know, their age, their sex, their lifestyle habits. What are the things are they following that aren't necessarily drinks related? So are there any brands that also fit, that are non-drinks category based, that might have a, that they also might be interested in, that can also help lead you to further partnerships down the line as well? That's just as an FYI. So, you know, where do they like to go on holiday? And you just start building up a picture of the type of person that you think would be interested in without being so specific about it. So yeah, and also another good little tip is, don't always just have it's going to be male, 25 to 40, etc. You might have a primary target audience and a secondary target audience as well. So you have some brands that actually, you know, they might have a product within their range that feels very male orientated, and then you might have some within that range which feel very female orientated. So if you just had one, then what do you do? So have a think. Don't also get bogged down too much by it, because, you know, 9 times out of 10, the person who you're targeting is probably yourself, because you created the brand.
That's a
So,
good point.
like, you know, I was recently working with somebody, and I genuinely got their friends to, without them knowing, to say what they thought about them, so we could start bringing in their brand tone of voice. What is it there, you know, what is it that gets them excited? What kind of people are they in their group? But also, quite importantly, the brand that these people were creating, this liquid, is very much based on them
Yeah.
and for their friends. So, you know, don't always think too hard. Sometimes it's staring you right in the mirror.
It's really interesting you should say that, actually, because I was speaking to a chap a little while ago who's essentially created it's like a ready to mix, ready
Mm.
to drink, sorry. It's like a cognac based cocktail.
Ooh,
And
need
hey,
some
bless
more.
him, he was quite a young lad, and there was no real story on the bottle or anything. When we probed him about it, there's an amazing story behind it. It was just like it's something he used to make for his family, and it became a bit of a thing
Oh,
at family dues. And it's just, oh, you need to, that's your thing, and it's
yeah.
naturally there. You don't even have to create it.
No, it's
Where
there.
it's just already there. So like sometimes it can be really obvious but still be missed. So
No, and
that
you
is
know
very
what?
good advice.
And the amount of conversations where it's been a brand new MPD, and I'm not talking a line extension, so a brand new idea, and it's just a case of sitting, having a conversation that feels like a completely normal conversation, and by the end of it, you go, so it's basically X, Y, and Z, and they went, oh yeah. And that's the point about, you know, going to someone who can just tease out all of those inner thoughts that have been mulling around, that you've been building up for however many months or years, and just teasing it out, and the answers are there.
Fantastic, fantastic. Moving on from that, so once you've got our audience,
Hmm.
um, I've kind of got two questions here, and I might just roll them into one because I
Go
feel they
for it.
work very well together. Um, I was looking at how you increase recognition of your brand online, and then I was
Yeah,
also going to ask about growing your brand, and I think they kind of go hand in
yeah, they
hand.
do, they do.
Yeah, if you
Um, so, well, I'm trying to grow brands all day long.
yeah,
So, also, let's just be clear on what growing brands means. So, do you mean so we can just, by the way, we've got growing brands in terms of distribution and growing volume, but then we've also
yes,
got growing brand awareness. So let's talk about
awareness,
growing brand awareness, because
brilliant.
um, the ways to grow brand awareness have just completely evolved in insane ways over the past few years, probably even over the in fact, even over the past 6 months or year, whilst we've been going through COVID.
Mm,
I don't even know
mm.
how many months of COVID now.
How many months?
Um, so, you know, fundamentally, this is where your brand tone of voice and look and feel come into play, that we were talking about. Now, there's no point in growing a brand if it's not clear what you're trying to sell and what your USPs are. So, and what I'd say to that is also take a step back. So, have you got a product that needs explaining within a wider category? So, your cognac chap, cognac RTD,
Mm.
I mean, I wish there was more cognac in the world.
Yeah.
Is just super accessible and lots on shelves. I love it. But
Yes.
um, cognac in the UK for your average drinker is not something that's on people's radar.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would say that that's the type of product where the category needs explaining, um, for people to then understand where that product fits.
Yes.
And actually, same goes for even if you're creating a rum or a gin, because the amount of I like to often think of gin and rum and a lot of spirits as being an umbrella, and then within that there are lots of subcategories. So, you know, if you took gin and you've got navy strength, you've got flavour gin, contemporary gins, etc., etc., if people don't understand either the category or the subcategory on which you're in, then they can't ever understand what your key points of difference are, no matter how many times you explain it on a simple advert or anything else. So to that, the first point I would say is genuinely think about a category approach. So, and it doesn't mean, and I get a lot of brands go, well, oh, does that mean we're going to talk about competitors? And you go, well, yeah, it does actually. But number one, nothing stands you in a better stead with the trade or consumers if you acknowledge that you're all in it together. There's no worst thing you could ever do is brand bash, but you
Yeah.
have to talk about other brands to be able to contextualize where you are. So that's important. So if you're doing a tasting, we've been doing this since days of yore, is you're tasting your brand, well, you have to compare it to other brands to be able to. So it's just the same thing, but instead of doing it on just a tasting manner, you can take that into other ways of growing your brand awareness. So what does a training session look like for the trade, that you can bring to life all of those other elements of looking at the wider category, doing an actual session on cognac, for example, and then building in your brand. So that's number one in growing brand awareness. Grow your category awareness as well. Number two, in terms of online, so get your identity completely sorted so that even if someone comes across your page, they know it's instantly you before they've even looked at the messaging, because so many people are led by aesthetics before they're, well, it's like the porn star martini. They're led by what it looks like first and then they taste it second. So, you know, we have to think about the aesthetics of a grid first as well. But importantly, the messaging, because there's no point in something looking great, like a great bottle of vodka, or, you know, all the money that's spent on packaging, if the contents and the messaging isn't right as well.
Mm.
So can you describe your product in one sentence? Can you describe what your brand DNA is about and what your marketing is about in one or two sentences? And then you start segmenting and prioritizing when and how and where you're going to be talking about those things. So is it in the first run of the brand that you are going to be talking about, hey, we're X brand, we are this type of gin or this type of rum, and our key USP is that we are, and don't say rebellious because Christ, everybody's rebellious. But you know what I mean? So we are, this is this, we start building a picture of what your character of the brand is about. Then you want to make sure that you've got the backup and the backbone of that. So what's the tasting? What's the profile? Have you won any awards? What's the production capabilities like? All of those things. And remember your target audience. Your target audience might be interested in some of those things, but not in the other things. And you might have to tweak and tailor, especially online, if you're going to be doing boosting and adverts, some of those things might be relevant for some element of your audience, and some bits might be relevant for another piece of the audience. And then also growing it online, it doesn't just always have to be about social. So, you know, if you're a brand owner that's just, you know, this is now your big thing, then don't forget LinkedIn. That there's a power in that, and making sure that you're within like-minded individuals and entrepreneurs and other business like-minded people. So don't forget that. But then also, don't forget about where brand awareness originally kind of heralded itself within the likes of traditional PR and I say print loosely, because there are ways to do print again, and make sure you maximize that. But even though you might have a print media partner, they might have more of a digital presence. So what could it look like if you wanted to partner with a media partner? So if you wanted to go with Lad Bible, what is it that you could do with Lad Bible and offer them? What videos have you got? What kind of content have you got? So that's completely away from social media, although it might get shared on there. Another way of growing your brand awareness, again, it's a lot of times digital, is on e-commerce. So, you know, let's be really honest, the amount of people that are just buying things online, and it's only set to grow further. And a lot of these platforms have the ability for you to have a bunch of information on there. So make sure you've got great videos, photography, and again, your messaging on there. Amazon, you can get an A+ page where it allows you to put all the details of your brand and be able for consumers to get to understand it a bit more. Put your drinks recipes on there. Conversely, you might, with some other retailers, want to take a banner ad, which again, succinctly, what does your brand look like, character, and everything else. So those are ways to grow your brand. And then in terms of traditional PR, you know, just go back to the fundamentals. You know, there's no point in having and doing PR if you've got nothing to talk about. So you can have a product, but unless there's a hook. So sure, when you launch, you might have a hook, and that's the reason why you've created the brand. But then what? So have you got any PR drinks that you've got a bar to create this cool, innovative serve that's like that, I don't know, lots of media partners would like to get behind. So, you know, what's going to be new PR hooks you know, what's a Guinness Book of Records type of thing that you might be doing that journalists are going to be interested in? Because journalists get bombarded all the time. So you can't just go, hey, look at my brand. What do you think? What do you think?
Yeah.
So yeah, hope that helps.
No, I think that does. It's interesting actually that last point you touched on, because we covered that a bit in our media and the
Mm.
distillers group. And you know, we had Christy, who's the editor for Master of Malt, on there, and
Oh yeah,
the amount of press releases you get through, and there's just nothing really of much interest there. And if you're going to take the time to do it, you know,
yeah.
make it stand out. It doesn't have it can be very succinct, but be doing something that's noticeable.
Yeah, it's got to be
Um,
something different. Like how many
yeah,
people are creating another rum or another gin or another
yeah,
liqueur?
yeah,
So what's the thing? And even if you've got a hook, once you've created it, then what? What's going to get a journalist excited about you, writing about you in 6 months' time?
yeah,
So you have to
absolutely.
give them something to write about. The other thing that you know, not for people to stray away from, as long as they feel comfortable doing it, is if you're a brand owner and you are the person behind the brand, like this has genuinely come from your heart, soul, and imagination, then you know, brands that do really well are those that have a person behind the brand. So, you know, get to a point where you feel comfortable, and maybe you are an element of marketing itself. So, you know,
Yeah.
you might feature on an advert, you'll feature in an interview, you know, it's those things.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well, because that's been touched on, like the personality behind the
Yeah.
product. And people don't really realize, some people just, they kind of want to stay in the background making it, but like they're actually such an amazing personality, they become a sellable thing
Well,
themselves.
that's it.
So
Because let's
yeah,
think about what in our, just in real life, what or how do we connect with people? We connect with people through talking and talking to other people. You connect with a bottle just through a liquid. There's a reason why, there are celebrity endorsements, because it puts the face to the brand, and people connect with the face more than they do with the brand. It brings it to life a lot more. So if you already are that person that can endorse it, then bloody great.
Yeah, exactly. Go
Yeah.
for
As long as
it.
you've
Use
got
what
a
you got.
personality. As long as you've got a personality. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. I can imagine like somebody who's incredibly boring becoming interesting for that. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, go down a certain route with it. I see what you mean. But yeah.
Um, okay, so that's brilliant. Thank you.
Mhm.
Moving on from there, is this something I'm quite nosy about this for my own self as well. So I'm hoping other people will be interested to hear what you
Yeah.
have to say. But how do you gauge the audience reaction? The reason I'm asking this is I
Mm.
recently have found that more people are viewing stuff than I realized because they're not reacting, but they're viewing it and they're enjoying it
Yeah,
weirdly.
yeah, yeah.
So how do you go about finding sort of a bit more of the truth behind what people think of what you're doing?
So it is an interesting one, because I think a lot of brands can get a little bit bogged down on looking at the insights and the engagement rates and everything like that. Like, absolutely look at it. But like you say, there can be people, like, let's say social media registers an engagement because someone stopped scrolling after 2 seconds. Someone might have noticed it, not needed to stop and look at it, but still taking an element of registration. And it's the same with even, traditional ways of doing advertising. You can't quantify, if someone's flicked through a magazine, seen an advert or a billboard, how much they've actually registered. But
Mm.
you've got to, you then have to look at things like, if you've put in a call to action. So the value of digital at the minute, which is wonderful, is you can use insights to give you a bit of a gauge, more so than you can with the traditional ways of doing so. But in terms of evaluating it even further, or was it to evaluate it or to increase engagement? What would you?
Oh, to be honest, I suppose it's kind of both, but for me, it's kind of evaluating
Yeah.
initially, and just knowing what people are actually thinking about what you're.
Yeah. So the other ways to evaluate, besides looking at the actual stats, is, do some actual consumer research. So if you've got a brand, whether it's 100 followers, 3,000 followers, or 5,000, those are engaged people on your brand. And this goes back to who's your target audience, because and we've literally just done this with a brand. We sent out a questionnaire to the people on who are following on Instagram, and we're asking them questions. And we're asking them questions that are purposely going to help drive some of, whether it's MPD, whether it's tweaking and doing a brand refresh, or tweaking some of the marketing ideas that we've got. And you ask them various questions, and that's the way that you can test the insight, because actually you might have just launched something and you ask them a question on it and they go, well, not really noticed it. So actually asking the people who are following you, that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
And conversely as well, you might want to go for people who don't follow you, and that's where consumer groups come in. Now, the only thing that I have a challenge with consumer groups is if you've only got 10 people in a room, is 10 people enough to really gauge what someone's opinion is? So it feels like you have to do a much bigger pool of people. But again, it is just asking people, and it's finding the right way to do that. And there are companies out there that can send questionnaires out, etc. But I think there is a value in having face to face, but it's just finding a way to be able to do that.
Mm.
And then the other thing is as well, that a lot of brands do, is they'll try and gauge trade opinion, and they'll ask trade. Where people fall down a lot though is they ask their mates, and often their mates are in one specific section of the trade. So you might end up getting a skewed opinion
Mm.
on, you might end up only having the top end influencers who work in hotel 5 stars, or, cool cocktail bars, when actually, to give you a real perspective, you need to have a cross section of the trade, for example. But yeah, I just say consumer insight with who you follow. Then look to people who don't necessarily follow you and haven't looked at, but then look at who you've designed as your target audience and try and get them in the room together, and take it from there, or do samples or whatever it is. And then the other thing is, don't forget about liquid on lips. There's no better way to gauge people's evaluation than when you've given them the liquid to try. The only thing to bear in mind with liquid on lips is is making sure you give them the two ways of trying it, or at least one way of trying it. Some people aren't interested in trying your gin neat. You know, that's not the way they're going to drink it. So just give it to them or give them a recipe, or give them, you know, a link to purchase with a mixer or whatever it is, and give them an easy way to evaluate. There are ways that you can do that with some retailers where, and I think even Amazon have a way of doing it, where you can get in touch and you can send samples out to people and gauge opinion and get reviews that are genuine, and take it from there. You can't build your brand on what your friends and family think.
Yeah, very true, very true. I'm going to slip in another question that's just come to mind because it seems like I should have thought of this before, really. So I'm thinking some of the people watching are maybe working on their first product. So I think we should probably address launching your first product, and just a few pointers on how to handle that, if that's okay.
Okay, launching your product. Okay,
So I'm
right.
going to
So let's go right
curveball.
back to the beginning on who you aimed at, what's the reason for it, what you're
Hmm.
doing.
Hmm.
So I've got a brand whereby they are just going to be solely focused on the trade. It's a very trade-led, premium, top-end product that bartenders are going to be keen on. So again, so who are you aimed at? Conversely, I've got another brand where it's going to be hopefully an extremely, it's a product that will have mass appeal. So again, so what do you look at? So think about those two things. The other thing is budget, because you can go as big or as small with your launch as you want. But what I would say fundamentally is, you need to just do the traditional pieces, whereby obviously you want to engage press, but make sure you've got some samples, and liquid on lips is crucial. There's no point in trying to do a launch if people can't try your product.
Yeah.
So on what scale can you get people to be trying your product? You know, sure, you can send it to press. Sure, you might be able to send it to bartenders. Find a way to send it to consumers. But also on what scale, so that you can really do something big or small depending on what budget. So liquid on lips for sure, and presses too. Okay, so, and then in terms of what's next, so, you know, traditionally you might have a launch party and you might get the amount of brands you see, well, this bartender's created this drink, and that's fine, but let's find drinks that people can make at home and are accessible. So that's the other thing. And the other thing to bear in mind with what a bartender's created is, that's fine, but a lot of great bartenders just want to make their own drink. So it's good to have the inspiration, and that's fine, and you can promote it, but just, you know, maybe find ways to engage and get, for your launch, if you've definitely already seeded your brand in and done a bit of a spiel and a selling before you've launched, then get those bars and get, say, 10 bars to create a cocktail that you could potentially have on a list on a cocktail, a cocktail card for 1 month or two when you launch the brand, so that people can then actually try the product and sample the product. And that's the other thing. Often people launch a brand without being able to get it. So a lot of people think that you launch it and then you get the listings, but actually you need to do some work in the background of getting some listings somewhere, which I know sounds like this biggest catch-22 ever, but this is where your friends and family can come in. This is where your network can come in.
Yeah.
And just, you know, get a couple. So, because the other thing is as well to remember, the press aren't going to promote it or talk about it if they can't tell people where to get it. Because if you think about it, you rarely see, ever, you never see a journalist say and talk about a product and then not give you the price and where to get it.
Yeah.
So that's really cool on launch. Make sure people can get it. Then also for launch, don't think about the long term. So I'd say for your launch, make sure you've got the long term to be able to be talking about. What are your marketing plans? What can you tell people that you've got planned?
Yeah.
So it isn't just an investment in the emotion of this great product that you're launching.
Yeah.
They can then commercially get invested in the long term plans and go, oh, okay, they've actually got a plan to build the brand too. So get ready to be able to talk about that as well and get people excited with it too.
Brilliant. Extremely brilliant. There's loads of pointers in there and things I should imagine people just aren't thinking about, and that's the whole
Yeah,
purpose of this.
good.
You've got a lot of knowledge.
Oh.
So moving on to the next question, which makes sense now we've asked the first one. How do you add a new product to an existing range?
Oh, right. Well, so there's a methodical way to do it, and the sensible. So some brands you just, you know, you can see what's next. So I mean, look, we can't talk about MPD without talking, let's say, about Whitley Neal.
Yeah.
So when I say about like being sensible and methodical, it made sense that they'd done a couple of flavored gins, and there was obviously a market for it. So you're like, okay, well then there's going to be another flavored gin, and then there'll be another flavored gin, and so it was a sensible, methodical route that you understood the journey that they were going for.
Yeah.
Then you can have some brands who, you know, the brand owner can have a million and one ideas, and there are so many of these people. And what I'd say is have an MPD in mind, and it can be as wacky as you want it to be. I hate that word wacky. By saying it's wacky or trendy means it's like essentially not. I hate those
Crazy.
words. Crazy. But it can be as innovative, again, boring. But anyway, it can be as left field as it wants. But what I would urge you to do is still make sure it has an undercurrent of a theme. So it doesn't have to be as obvious as, say, Whitley Neal, where you knew, like, oh, they've done raspberry, probably blackberry might come out. That would make sense. Like, you know, make sure there's a theme that still corresponds, that people can connect that NPD to your original line, and you create, this sounds cringy, but it's totally true, you want to create a family.
Yeah.
Now don't get me, now here's an interesting thing. You can create a family, and again, I'll use Whitley as an example, but the Whitley family, the price point was exactly the same for all of those Whitley Neals. But you can have a brand that wants to create an MPD which does not fit within, it doesn't follow a line, a specific line extension to that specific original member of the family, right? So what do I mean by that? You can have a range of gins that are priced at £26. They follow a specific brand look and feel. The bottle's all the same and everything else. But then you might have a brand that wants to create something that sits in the standard price point. It will therefore have a different bottle, and it might have a different USP in terms of, you don't go for fruit flavors that everybody knows. It might just have a difference in terms of the flavors that you're approaching. So so it's still the same family, but they're not brothers and sisters. It's like having a younger sister, an older sibling, and the father and everything else. So that's really interesting. But the key thing again is what's the genes that link them all together again. So I just make sure you don't forget that. And go back to the reasons why you created the brand, because I think sometimes people get carried away and go, oh, it's a great idea, let's do this, and you go, okay, but how is that related to what you've just created? And they go, I don't know, but I want to do it. And you're like, okay, but let's find a way to bring it back. And the thing is, look, if someone was to do a complete spin-off, I'd say, you know, look, if you're just convinced that that's what you want to do and that's fine, then maybe I'd just say, is it a different brand that you want to create? Because if it doesn't have any synergy with what you've created, then just people are like, well, it just feels frenetic and not connected. So then in terms of what to do next is, you know, again, go back to how you'd originally create a brand. Who are your competitors? What's the space? Is it limited edition? Limited edition, you see a lot of limited editions whereby, you know, it's a great way of gauging if it's going to work. Also, you see a lot of limited editions might use ideas, products, ingredients, bottles that actually can mean it can only be limited edition, because you've had such a left field idea that the cost of goods to create that product is so weird and wonderful. But then saying that, if it becomes a massive hit and you can bring the cost of those goods down, then it could become an absolute, you know, beast for you, which great.
Awesome.
Does that help?
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
And then, sorry, link it back to your social media plan. And so does that new product still fit with your brand DNA? So hence going back to what are the genes, and then figuring out what your now social media plan is going to be, your PR strategy. Because, so what I will say is, what you then need to do is, if you end up with, if you start off with one bottle and you end up with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, then you're going to have to plan in which one gets share of voice and when, in terms of PR. So is it that you're going to talk about your original one 70% of the time and your new one 30% of the time, or is it going to flip for the first 6 months and then go back? What tends to happen with big brands, if you start going down the line, is you just then have to figure out what is going to fit where, and some might become more of a priority. And actually, you know, your original baby might just have to play second fiddle for a bit, and maybe you might be prepared for that, maybe you won't be. So
yeah. I find you get quite a lot of that in the gin world when you have an original gin and then you bring out a pink gin. That a lot of
Yes.
people go mad for the pink gin, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah, and then you need to think about, well, how do you, make sure people don't forget you've got the original gin,
yeah.
and all of those. And actually, what is really interesting about the flavored gin situation,
Mm.
and I've got a brand that I'm looking after now, whereby they are known for weird and wonderful liquids and gins, like super weird. Like they were the first on the market for a lot of these fruit gins, but my God, they've got this core range,
Mm.
which is, you'd be fools not to have it in a martini. Like
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, it's incredible. So it's also letting people know that just because you might have created a pink gin,
Mm.
it doesn't mean you need to alienate those that want, a core traditional gin that's, suitable for a martini as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Right.
Um, Lovely. Okay. Moving on, something that might be important for some viewers, I'm thinking if they've, so when you get started, you might have your initial branding and you're starting to get a bit more money behind you. So you just want to refresh, you just want to bring it up to date.
Hmm.
So refreshing the branding. Can we get some
Yeah.
tips on that, please?
Oh, I love a brand refresh. Um, Oh, it's great. So, well, the principles are the same as creating the brand, really. But where the challenge comes is, and I see this from my side, and I've definitely gone through this process, is maybe saying and suggesting to a brand owner that they need to go through a brand refresh because, you know, quite rightly, a brand owner, it's their baby. They've worked on this logo and this brand identity, and
Yeah,
so why wouldn't it be great? And
yeah,
it's just taking through and making them realize that, without being super condescending or anything, but, trends change, people's consumer habits change,
mm,
what do people like to look at, all of these things, what messaging, sustainability is a great thing right now
yeah.
in terms of brand refresh. And I'm not saying that you need to do a refresh around sustainability, but that's a piece of messaging that you now definitely need to include, whereas a few years ago you never needed to even think about it.
Mm.
So the exciting thing with a brand refresh, you're saying like how to do it or how to approach it, or like,
Yeah, I just guess tips on doing it. I suppose for my like if I were to approach it, I would be looking at, do you need to retain some ideas of what you originally had that people
yeah.
like and have gone for? And then how do you bring new stuff into that
Yeah.
as well?
So this goes back to your MPE question as well, because you can do a brand refresh, but it's got to have a core. How can I describe this articulately? So you need to be able to bring that core DNA to life, and you can absolutely do that and make it look completely different to the way it looked before, as long as you're comfortable with that look. You can go as far or as inwards as you want in terms of a brand refresh. You can do subtle changes. Cadbury's is a great example of that. Cadbury's re-released their logo, I think, a year or two ago. Most people went, what's changed? um, and people couldn't pinpoint it, but they knew something had. But it was so minute, and they'd spent fortunes on it. But then conversely, you can go to a brand like we did with Whitley Neal, which we went from just an African sunset for
Mm,
everything through to making sure that each one of those members of the family had something to be able to talk about.
yeah,
And conversely as well, with something like Beaufort versus gin, we've got, because there's a brand tweak in the name there,
yeah,
but they've also got a rum, Three Tides rum. They're very
yeah,
different from each other, but they come under the halo of Beaufort Spirit.
mhm,
So we're going through a bit of a bottle refresh there on both of them.
yeah.
But then when it comes to talking about the brand, we need to make sure that they have a brand. They've had to have a bit of a brand refresh to make sure that they look like a family too. So, in terms of the brand refresh, you can also, I mean, think about even just your bottle. You can do something very subtle. All those elements, whether it's the bottle cap, wax, labels, all of those things, new, like just the tiny little elements. But then you can go through into the actual brand look and feel. Like, how much are you going to change it? Are you going to be doing a massive ATL campaign or new trade marketing where you have to have physical visual images that are going to go on posters and in adverts, in tent cards, all of those things? So what I would suggest is you go to a graphic designer, an agency, whatever that looks like, and you run them through the whole brand proposition from day one of when you created it, so they understand the genesis of your brand, and that means that they can make sure that's incorporated into it. And then they come back with, let's say, 3, 5, however many ways that they have now visualized that your brand can now be achieved. And what I would say as well is just another little tip is make sure you get them to visualize what that could look like in the on trade, in the off trade. So do a couple of examples of a poster or whatever it is, so that you can see how and imagine what it looks like. And the other thing to bear in mind in terms of a brand refresh, often a brand refresh will come with your starting to do lots of MPD. So how do you let in an advert, if you've got 3 products in a family, how do you let each of them have their share of voice? So you might need in a brand refresh, what does a standalone advert for one of those bottles look like, but then what does the family advert look like as well? And then not just the visualization, but the messaging. So and that's where you can implement signature serves into an advert or whatever it is, and make sure there's a bit of a commonality amongst them all too.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. Now we are running short on time, so we'll get this wrapped up. I was going to ask firstly, obviously, just to give some final do's and don'ts. I know it's quite hard to surmise so much. You've got such a wealth of information. It must be quite hard to surmise it. I know you mentioned the 3 points. Passion was one of them.
Yeah, it was passion, preparation, and then
perseverance, or was that
perseverance? Yeah, probably actually in the original one. So passion for sure, because and this links into perseverance. It's not easy. It's fun for sure, and this is why I think you need to be passionate about the product that you're doing, or at least have people behind you that are passionate about it. But there are challenges along the way. Even if you got the cool fun stuff of the brand DNA all done and dusted, then you're looking into, and you've got your procurement and production and logistics. My God, that will set you back. I mean, I speak to a number of brand owners daily, and they're telling me about, they can't get stuff across the water, the pricing issues, expectations on pricing too, and we'll be seeing ways that you can bring pricing down, but still make sure that it still looks like and tastes like the product that you want it to be. Investment. A lot of brands have to go through investment rounds, and making sure that you've got everything up to speed, and make sure you've got everything investment ready to speak to potential investors. That's another stress and a half. So you've got to really be passionate and believe in the product that you've got, and have a heck of a load of perseverance and time to be able to do it. But as I say, this is where, like, hopefully a talk like this helps you prepare for what needs to come, and don't go into it blind. Like, know that it's a hard struggle, know that it will be, as I say, it will be fun, but prepare where you need it to be and you want it to be. What's your expectation of this brand realistically, that your friends and family haven't just told you this is great, you should do it? Prepare to make sure that you've got the budget to support those ideas. Don't just rely on friends and family to help you. That's the other thing. A lot of brands will start off with that, but then you can get into a bit of a minefield a bit later on by having friends that aren't necessarily giving you the advice or have the capabilities to take you to the next level. So be mindful that you might want to make sure those boundaries don't get blurred. So yeah, and just just make sure you enjoy what you do. And do always, here's one for you, do always counter for having sampling in your budget. What I mean by sampling is, if you're giving a bottle away to your mum or to a neighbour, that's coming off your budget. And lots of people forget that. So always put in bottle samples into your bottom line budget. Do that. Yes.
That's brilliant. Oh, thank you so much once again.
No worries.
Wealth of information, and absolutely fascinating to listen to.
No, I really enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Before we go, I want to give you the floor to mention your award, because I don't think that's been mentioned yet. And
so this is super exciting. So we only launched in September, and a month or so ago now, 2 months ago, found out not least that we were nominated for PR agency of the year, but we bloody won it. Like, this is insane. So happy about this. It was with the PR agency of the year from the Icon of Gin Awards, which is just wonderful. You know, and I've been in and around gin, you know, since bartending, not least when I've got into marketing. So to be really recognised for that was absolutely wonderful. So whoever still don't know, whoever nominated us, thank you. Amazing. Don't know who you are, make yourself known. And then whoever voted for us, my God, thank you again for that as well. Just bloody extraordinary. So yeah, there we go.
Lovely. I will just note as well for those watching that there will be a live Q&A system. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. I hope
Absolute
everybody
pleasure.
enjoyed watching.
Yeah, no, thank you everybody for tuning in. Like, I hope there's been some nuggets of information, and yeah, look forward to a live Q&A to answer more.
Brilliant. Thank
Brilliant.
you very much.
Excellent. No worries. Take care. Bye bye.